have to remember that disinformation is free. You can get that anywhere, all the time, on your phone. And so in order for us to have these wonderful sites like Bobbie's and like other ones across the country that do not have a paywall, we have to have robust funding.
Welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the Executive Director, and today we're beginning another mini-series which will examine the pivotal role of information and facts and the function they play in a healthy democracy. There are plenty of good reasons for Americans to feel that the country is actually coming apart at the seams, not least because our disinformation industries are doing such a good job at fueling the division and the polarization. It's a propagandist dream. Well, before I introduce today's distinguished moderator and our panel, I must share a nugget with you that synthesized the scale of the problem to me. First off, the latest member to join Cambridge Forum is ChatGPT at OpenAI. So I deleted that, but clearly we've been scraped, which is the new lingo to describe when they latch onto you. So to add to my general unease about these LLMs, which are large language models, which was voiced by Gary Marcus on the April forum to discuss the perils of ChatGPT, he posted today an example that was generated from Microsoft Bing. This was posted on Facebook concerning the departure of the Speaker of the House yesterday. It contained no less than 7 lies in 4 sentences. So it endorses Marcus's view that LLMs are too dumb to distinguish facts from fiction. So why do I quote this example? Well, it ties in nicely to the thrust of today's discussion. Trustworthy information, its dissemination, and how this directly affects the outcome of elections. I'm delighted to hand over this discussion to Charlie Sennott. He's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the GroundTruth project, which is home to both Report for America and Report for the World. Charlie is an award-winning correspondent, a best-selling author, an editor with 30 years of experience in national and international and local journalism. On top of all this, he's a leading social entrepreneur who launched the reporting initiative, Report for America, back in 2017. So welcome to Charlie. And joining him are 3 formidable media professionals. Carol Wood, who is the Business Innovation Director for the Colorado News Collaborative, which supports 180 media organizations in Colorado. Bobbie Roessner, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and also the founding editor of the New Bedford Light. And Tracie Powell, who is the founder and CEO of the Pivot Fund. She's a leader in philanthropic efforts to increase racial equity and diversity in news media. So welcome, Charlie, and welcome to everybody. So Charlie, tell us, why should we care about this?
Thanks, Mary, and thanks everyone for joining us. This is just an incredible panel. I can't wait to get the conversation rolling and also hear questions from all of you. The reason we need to care about this crisis in local news is that it's really become a crisis for our democracy. I think that the crisis in local news has become so broad in its impact that I would even argue it's become a crisis for how we think about truth itself. I mean, I think we are starting to lose touch with how we come together for shared sets of facts. And I think that forces communities to unravel. So one of the things that's I think really important to get us started is I want to try to frame the problem. I want to say, like, just how severe is this problem? For those of you who don't know, it's a 5-alarm fire. Do you hear the alarms in the background? I don't know if you can hear the sirens, but there's fire trucks going by. That's actually good audio because this is a 5-alarm fire. When you think about what's happened to local news in America, right now, 70 million Americans live in communities that could be defined as a news desert, or they're right there teetering on the edge of becoming one. We know that 1,800 communities in the United States have lost their local newspaper. No one is watching the store in 1,800 communities in America. The one that makes me saddest, and I think is the easiest to get your head around, is 2 newspapers die every week in America. This is a crisis for our democracy that I would argue has the similar and even greater depth of job loss as the collapse of coal or steel. And as important as those industries were to jobs in this country, I'd argue that the collapse of the news industry, journalism, is more important and more fateful, because we can't have a democracy without that foundation of journalism, particularly local journalism, where we come together as communities around these local issues that we read about together in our local news organization, whether that's digital or print or on the radio. So what happens when a country what happens when a county or a community has a news desert? We know there are at least 3 things that happen. Voter participation plummets, polarization surges, and a really interesting one that isn't discussed enough is bond ratings drop. Banks do not want to invest in communities that have no one watching the store. I think the other thing we lose that's a little bit less tangible than those is we lose the storytelling of a community. Like, the role of a great newspaper is to tell the story of a community, and you suddenly don't have the stories of heroes who should be celebrated or villains who should be called to task and who need a light shone upon them. You don't have those stories of someone who won the math competition that become these yellowed clips on a refrigerator with magnets holding it up. And like my family, we had great achievements that sat there for years and years and years. And I'm sure many of you know this feeling about your local newspaper. We also know that this impact causes us to fracture, and there's no greater evidence than January 6th to know just how far pulled apart we are as a country. So I think there is a through line from the collapse of local news to the violence we saw on January 6th and the attack on the institution of our country, Congress, really the attack on our election system, our voting. And I think that is why we're going to be talking about what do we need to do to fix local news so that we can heal our own country and our own democracy. We're going to also get a little bit to the idea that this is not only a crisis in the United States, this is a truly global crisis. Local news is perishing around the world, and it's causing the same problems: lack of civic participation, polarization, communities that no longer are holding together. And we're seeing this in places like Brazil and India. And really interestingly, I've been in Ukraine recently, where the Donbass had all of its local news organizations in the Donbass were weakened or closed in the years that just before the 2014 invasion of Crimea, which was preceded the invasion of Kyiv last year. So this is happening in places around the world, and there's a reason for all of us to care and to come together. And one of the things that I really love about this gathering is that I was just learned from Mary that we have people on this call who are from Angola and Antarctica, from Arlington, Massachusetts, and also from ChatGPT. So I think this community right here is really represents just how many people care about this problem. One of the first questions I want to get to is, like, how do we define what is local? It sounds like it's a deceptively simple question, but I think if you just think about the gathering on this right here on this event, all of you coming together on Zoom from so many different places, I really want to challenge ourselves to think in new ways about what it means to be local. So I want to start with you, Bobbie. Your news organization, the New Bedford Light, is extraordinary. I've followed it closely. A little bit of truth in advertising. I do have a loved one, my son, who has been working with you, and I feel like it's an extraordinary news organization serving its community. The way you built it was really exciting. Please get into some of that, but maybe just help us understand, like, how do you define what is local in New Bedford, Massachusetts?
Right. Well, just a quick anecdote from my many years in print media, legacy media, working for a lot of different corporate and chain companies, is that what happened with chain ownership, which has given way to private equity, ownership of news outlets is that they homogenize the content to save money, right? They're chasing clicks to serve advertisers. The content gets more and more diluted and diluted and diluted until there's nothing there. And that's what we see not only in these news deserts, but in what we refer to as the proliferation of ghost newspapers or zombie newspapers, right? They maybe have one sort of perfunctory press release type story on their front page or the top of their website, and then everything else is canned and coming from some central repository somewhere. So what that whole process has done is neglected the fundamental fact that every community is unique. It's unique in its demographics, it's unique in its size, it's unique in its challenges, its glories, its needs. And so what we did with the New Bedford Light, which by the way is all digital, was really look very, very carefully at what the needs are in this particular city of 100,000 people, which is very poor, very heavily immigrant community, and really looked at what were the needs and what are the gaps in the local ecosystem. So not only do we have a ghost paper in New Bedford, but you do have media outlets out there that cover high school sports, that do a good job covering, I don't know, real estate transactions, whatever. We don't duplicate that. We looked at where's the need, where's the gap, and how are we going to make a difference? And we came down on a very strategic content strategy of investigating issues and celebrating culture. And that's what we do, because that's how we can make a difference in New Bedford. We can make a difference with investigative reporting and explanatory reporting, but we can also tell the stories you referred to of the whole of the city, the incredibly diverse tapestry that is a city like New Bedford, through arts and culture, because arts and culture is thriving in New Bedford at the same time that it's a poor city and has all these incredible challenges, which we investigate, write about. We also celebrate the local culture.
Thanks, Bobbie. It is really one of the great things of that weekly read is to know just how much is going on in New Bedford in terms of music and art and poetry and celebrations of its own literary tradition and its immigrant groups that come together and have really interesting ways of celebrating their own culture. I love that about what you're doing. Congratulations on it. We're really proud to have the New Bedford Light as a partner with Report for America. I want to just say briefly, all three of our panelists have worked with us in one way or another at GroundTruth through our program, Report for America. We have about 600 reporters who we've placed in 200 newsrooms across all 50 states. So we have a unique and really privileged point of view to be able to see like just how communities are struggling, what they're looking to do. And we're trying our best to be of service to them by providing local reporters in those newsrooms. So if anyone has questions on that, we can talk about it. But I want to keep going on these amazing panelists who we have an unbelievable opportunity to work with. Tracie, I want to say it's just been incredibly great to see you recently. We were recently at a conference together, and to hear all of the thinking you're doing and just how much your organization is growing in leaps and bounds. Tell us more about the Pivot Fund and help us understand, how do you in your work support these local news organizations, and how do you define what is local?
Thank you so much, Charlie. It was great seeing you too, and I'm happy to be here today. The Pivot Fund is a philanthropic organization. I call it a venture philanthropy organization that invests in hyperlocal community news, prioritizing newsrooms led by and for communities of color. These communities have long been ignored and underserved, harmed by traditional news media. And so what we saw when I got back to my home state of Georgia in 2016 was a swath of news deserts that had cropped up in the state. And I looked at Penny Abernathy's research to see that 17 counties in Georgia were considered news deserts. I've, as any good journalist and editor, I went back over her research and I wanted to really understand what was happening in these communities. And so we did what Bobbie talked about. We actually listened to community members. We asked them, who do you trust and why? Where do you get your information and how do you access it? And what do you do with it once you get it? And that led us to, just by talking and listening to communities, that led us to these newsrooms, these news outlets that were on nobody else's radar, that was providing critical news and information for their communities in different languages, different formats. A lot of them were on social media because, let's face it, that's where a lot of folks are now. That's how a lot of people get their information, is through their social feeds. And so they pointed us to news outlets that were on Facebook, for example, or Instagram. There's an Instagram account with almost 1 million subscribers right here in Georgia. And when I look at the traditional newspaper, I was amazed because that newspaper has 120,000 subscribers between digital and print. Now imagine 1 million on Instagram, 120,000. Who is impacting whom? And I know that disinformation flows very freely on social media, but we have to take the fight to them on the platforms where that disinformation exists. You asked the question earlier about how do we define local news. Journalists and journalism are very important. We're the only profession specifically mentioned in the US Constitution. But I believe that how we define journalism matters less and less as we see the trust among the public decline. And so I push back and I'll say, how do our communities define local news? What matters to them? What's important to them? How are they reimagining what news and information is? And when we ask that question, instead of asking each other that question, when we ask that question of our community members, it leads us to organizations like Pasta Lavos in Savannah, Georgia, one of our grantees, that was producing news and information on Facebook. It was born out of a need to communicate how folks needed to stay safe during a hurricane. And it grew into a media outlet. They have recently reported about a mobile home park where 500 poor Hispanic immigrants live that goes without water constantly, without clean water. Because of their month-long reporting, the city of Savannah is now making sure that community receives water. That's the impact. To them, that was local news. To folks around them that might have that has water and maybe take it for granted, that they have access to water anytime they want, may not have mattered. But to that particular community, that mobile home, 2 mobile home parks, it mattered. That was local news. It matters to folks in LaGrange, where BTV, April Ross, another one of the organizations we invested in, she is bringing together a mostly African-American audience that she grew on social media, along with a white evangelical Christian audience that was on this Christian cable channel. She now owns that channel, and she's injecting news and bringing these two audiences together. Now, journalists have been working for decades trying to bridge the divide between conservatives and liberals, and April is actually doing it. I can go on and on about some of these organizations, and we can talk about it more later. But one of the things that Pivot does is, yes, we go into the news deserts, and we have identified oases. That's how I refer to them. Oases, where folks have built their own information infrastructure to serve the critical information needs of the people they live next door to, of the people they see every day in the grocery store, of the folks who are having conversations about some of the most pressing matters happening in their lives. And then they're creating the information and the news that these folks deem important and serving those needs in that way. So I look forward to this continued conversation, and
Thanks.
I'm just excited that we're having it.
Thanks, Tracie. Just to extend the metaphor, I think everyone on this panel, and really, I think there's so many of us who are finding any way we can to put our hoe into the soils to try to turn it over and plant new seeds and make sure we're getting some green shoots in these news deserts. And there's amazing work that you've done, Tracie. Bobbie, your news organization is an incredible example. Carol, you sort of are like an agribusiness of new green shoots. You're like pulling together, what is it, 180 media organizations in Colorado that you're working with the Colorado News Collaborative. It's an extraordinary effort that has great reach in a state that's really seeing this crisis in some acute ways. So share with us like what you're doing in Colorado. Where are you seeing some stories of success, and try to get at this issue of how do we think about how we define local news? What is local?
Well, thank you, Charlie, and thanks to the Cambridge Forum and to my fellow panelists. It's a great discussion and a great topic. So in Colorado, we have the news deserts. That's one of the things that the Colorado News Collaborative saw a problem. And 3 years ago, just more than 3 years ago, the Colorado News Collaborative was formed. It is a consortium of 180 newsrooms in Colorado. We have print digital hybrids, digital only, radio and TV. And the idea behind the collaborative was to share news stories, to work collaboratively on news stories to help cover these areas that are news deserts here in Colorado. And one of the problems we have here in this state as well is a digital divide. So not everyone has access to robust broadband. So print news is still very, very important in Colorado. We have some great digital only organizations. We also have some organizations that are print only. There's an example I can think about on the Eastern Plains of Colorado, where there's a really wonderful print newspaper, but her email list is only 40 people large. And so you have to keep the print alive in Colorado, at least for the foreseeable future. Now, the infrastructure bill is going to address that over the next couple of years here in Colorado. But the other thing, well, let me answer your question about local. We do define local as we have microsites here in Colorado, 1 and 2 person operations that cover maybe just one topic. There's an organization in Boulder, digital only organization, and all she does is cover city council, that one thing. So we have microsites, and then we have statewide organizations like the Denver Post, really the only statewide print paper that's left. And it is owned by a hedge fund. So to Bobbie's point, that's something that we deal with here in Colorado as well. In addition to news deserts, something that we encountered here this summer was a printing press desert. There's very few printing presses left in the state of Colorado. We had a major press that was owned by Gannett in southern Colorado, in the city of Pueblo, and it closed and gave 80 contract publishers 8 weeks to find a new printing press. And that was an enormous challenge. And so as the Colorado News Collaborative, we worked with those publishers in partnership with the Colorado Press Association, which is an amazing, strong organization here in Colorado, and the Colorado Media Project, which is a funding roundtable that helps find funding to support local news organizations in Colorado. So between these 3 organizations, we call ourselves an ecosystem. We meet representatives of those 3 organizations. We meet every week. I'm contracted to the Colorado News Collaborative on the business side. As I explained earlier, they started as a let's collaborate on reporting. This year, It's let's also collaborate on business. And you have all of these really wonderful news organizations, some of them relatively new, that are run by great journalists, but they don't know how to run a business. And so both the Colorado News Collaborative and the Colorado Press Association, in partnership with Colorado Media Project, have added this year, 2023, and hopefully we can extend into the foreseeable future, collaborative business solutions for our partners and our members. And so on the printing press, we look at this collaborative solution and regional solutions. We had to go to New Mexico and Kansas and Wyoming to find some of those 80 newspapers that were left without a contract printing facility, to find them a printing home. And so I see the solutions that we're finding in Colorado on a local basis, statewide basis, expanding into a regional basis. And I think as both the news deserts and the business deserts expand and grow, we're going to have to solve these things on a regional basis, not just hyper local or statewide, but we're going to have to work regionally together with our neighboring states.
Thanks. Really, this is going to be a problem that is solved by innovation and just the grit of entrepreneurs who are going to create new things. And I know you're helping some of the more traditional media print, but you're also supporting people who are being, just really creative in the way they're thinking about going at this problem. So one of the questions I want to be sure we get at is kind of the question of the panel, which is how can local news play a role in pulling us back together as a country? I mean, I don't think I can't, certainly in my lifetime, not since at least 1968 has this country been so divided. It feels like it's at a boiling point that is distressing as we look forward to the next election and we think about just how divisive it could be. And we think about what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. So let's talk for a minute about sort of the optimism here, right? All of you are involved in new entities that are doing these really tremendous efforts to save local news operations, to reimagine them, to hear communities, as you said, Tracie, so that we really know what the issues are so we can serve them better. Can local news play a role in pulling us back together and hopefully shoring up our democracy, which feels stressed, and some would even say it feels like the foundation is cracked these days? So if you think I'm overstating it, let me know. But if that sounds like the right framing, I'd love to just go around the horn here. And Bobbie, would start with you. Just what role can local news play in really addressing the crisis in our democracy? Bobbie, you're on mute, I think.
I don't know if we can fix it, which was the question in the title of the panel, but I think we can make a big difference. There's so many ways in which we at the New Bedford Light have been able to engage people who were never engaged before, and how we've been able to animate civic life in lots of different ways. And a lot of that, some of that is voting, but that's not really what it's about, because in our community, for example, the voter turnout is abysmal, and it just is, and it's going to take years and years and years for people to reconnect with civic life. And I think a strong, ferociously independent news outlet, which is something that we hammer. We are not ideological. We are not beholden to a political party or our donors or our board members or our funders or, people who want us to publish their press releases, whatever it is. We are independent journalists. And, that's like so fundamental to us here on this panel, but people don't even believe it. They don't even believe that we're nonpartisan at first. But I think they're starting to see it now, because we're equal opportunity skeptics. And we do critical thinking and investigating of all kinds of folks who have vested interests in the community. And we've made, I wouldn't say enemies, but, we've made a lot of friends, but we've also got politicians running scared, and because they know we're watching. And when people see that, they appreciate it. And that to me is the most heartening aspect of this whole endeavor in New Bedford, is all the people who've gotten involved. So we're very local, we're very community based. We're funded by our donors. We're nonprofit, and all digital, and very, very big on social media and video and all the different ways that you need to connect with different kinds of people, including those who don't speak English. So we do a lot of Spanish language content. But, we've been able to inject facts and research into roiling debates that tend to be very emotional and very fractured and very polarizing on, say, rent control. And, we don't endorse candidates, but we come into a debate like that by looking at what have been the effects of rent control around the country and in other communities like ours, to see what we can do here. Well, that takes time, it takes effort, it takes really deep reporting, really broad reporting. And when I see people go to a council meeting, circulating a petition for something or other that references our work, that just thrills me. That just thrills me. That's what it's about. And they do. And we recently did a reader, a community survey, and about, how the community feels about us and the work we're doing, and getting their suggestions and stuff. But this is the most heartening thing I've seen in a very long time. Half the respondents said that they had taken some kind of action thanks to the New Bedford Light. They voted, they wrote a letter, they made a phone call, they went to a meeting, whatever it was. Maybe they went to a cultural event. But half of them said they had taken action. That is democracy.
That is beautiful. And that is one of the cleanest metrics for impact I've heard from, we deal in this realm every day, looking for how do you measure the impact of local news? And I think that's as good as any. Like, has this news organization provided you local information that was actionable for you to go to vote or to join a celebration of the culture within your community? Congratulations on that number. That is impressive. Tracie, I want to note that we're halfway through. And I want to give you some time to really answer this question, but I do want to be aware that we got to get to some of the audience questions too. This is important. How do you see this bigger question that's really at the core of our gathering here, which is, what role can local news play in trying to fix what feels like a very broken democracy?
So, very important question. The hyperlocal newsrooms that we work with tend to focus on really hyperlocal issues. The people in LaGrange, Georgia, for example, know that they can trust and count on BTV to deliver them news about what's happening in their local schools. Can count on her to tell them what's happening with local businesses and why why water rates are going up, or why their property insurance is going up, because development is happening there too. She really focuses in on hyper local issues. They know that she's the one that they call when they have questions about what's happening down at the jail with COVID, and people are worried about relatives or family members that may be in the local jail. She's also the one that was called when a local official who was convicted on criminal charges turned themselves in to the local prison. April was there recording it live as it happened, and she was the only one there. So the way that we break through this hyperlocal polarization is by supporting, investing in these hyperlocal newsrooms that are embedded in their communities. They, folks go to the grocery store, they know April, they see April, they can talk to April, they know they can count on her to tell them the truth. And there's a difference between, I know journalists, we are very consumed with facts, and then rightfully so, but facts aren't always the truth. And so I think that sometimes we can get lost in that, right? If you don't tell the whole story, then that's not the truthful story. Mm-hmm. So they turn to these folks that they know, their neighbors, right? Their neighbors, to count on them. They, some of the research tells us people trust other people. They don't necessarily trust platforms. They trust other people they know. And that's what is at the core of how Pivot does its work and the kinds of news organizations that we invest in.
I love the title of your talk, People Power, at our conference this last weekend. It was really, I think it was spot on in terms of this challenge to democracy. Like, what role is local reporting going to play? And I think sort of wider aperture on it that I want to ask you to think about, and I want to come back to you because I want to come back to this point, but it's sort of, how important is it that we think about changing how we tell the stories of these communities and change who is telling the stories to build more trust? And I've heard you really riff on this, Tracie, and I want to come back to that. So think about that, and we're going to circle back. Carol, I want to ask you a just slightly different, a pivot away a little bit from the democracy question right into the business model, because if we don't have sustainable operations for news organizations serving these local communities, then this problem is just going to continue to burgeon out of control, and we're just going to see it just continue to rage like a fire, right, and rip right through more communities. But one of the things that's most exciting in this space, I think, is the nonprofit journalism models. I think they are the ones where we're seeing the most excitement. We're seeing, really interesting and very dynamic business models that have revenue in them, right? This is not just about putting your hand out for donations. It's thinking about sponsorships, thinking about events, thinking about a lot of different ways to create revenue that is community supported and that relies on people who are willing to fund the mission of the organization and not just the eyeballs on it for advertisers. And I think, Bobbie touched on that, but you're right on a really interesting edge of that new sense of innovation and the dialogue that's going on within the businesses in supporting a lot of for-profits, as well as those who are, I think, what we might call hybrids, right? Who are using nonprofit and for-profit. Give us a quick take, and I want to emphasize the word quick, on the insights you're seeing on the in the business community, the business side of this, and how that's going to help these local news organizations be sustainable.
Sure. One of the things that I love about news orgs in Colorado, and I know nationwide, is the willingness of publishers to experiment. And so we have public benefit corporations, we have nonprofits, we have for-profit models here, and each one of those has the same goal, and that is to listen to the community, which has been said here before. And I want to say I was a reporter for years and years before getting involved in the business part of our industry, and I've stayed in the business side because I've come to understand how important it is for us to have a strong foundation so that we can continue to support that good journalism. We have to remember that disinformation is free. You can get that anywhere, all the time, on your phone. And so in order for us to have these wonderful sites like Bobbie's and like other ones across the country that do not have a paywall, we have to have robust funding, whether that is through, from organizations like Tracie's or other ones around the country that are supporting the nonprofits. And I have to say, we have a situation here in Colorado where the public benefit corporations and some for-profit models still are receiving grant funding. There are ways to do that. You can get a fiscal sponsor. And out here in the West, water is a huge issue. So I know of an organization that needed a water reporter. So they went to a funder who funds water issues in Colorado, and made the very successful argument that if water is important to your nonprofit, we need a reporter to cover it. And that nonprofit funded that reporter at the news organization, and the news organization was not a nonprofit. So there are ways for us to do this if the news organizations have a fiscal sponsor. And the other thing I think that you can do as a news organization to engender trust in your community is consider getting verified. There's news organizations, nonprofits like the Journalism Trust Initiative that will go in and audit a news organization for truth and accuracy and give that news organization the equivalent of what used to hold the weight of a blue check mark on what was formerly Twitter, and then go through that audit every year or so. And that helps the community to understand that, yes, this news organization is not one of disinformation that's free, but it's one of fair and accurate reporting that also is free, because we've been able to well fund it either through memberships or through grants or donations or low interest loans. That's another thing that we're doing in Colorado is low interest loans.
Carol, thanks. I want to just say there's a great question that I think we need to make sure we pay some attention to from the audience about, can local town governments, governments that do things like support libraries, recreation, councils on aging, what role can they play in funding a local newspaper without compromising the independence? It's sort of one of the deep questions of our time. What role will public policy play in trying to save local news? It is a public good, but all of us who are journalists are deeply allergic to government funding, right? And I would just say, I want to say to a little partial quick answer to this excellent question would be, we have to be really careful, in short. And there are ways to think about public support for journalism. And I want to say this is not new. Public radio, public television have been doing this for a long time, community-supported efforts, but they also get grants from what's called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is federal money. And that was a movement created in the Great Society under Lyndon Johnson to say, we need to enlighten and inform audiences in ways that commercial television and radio are not getting it done. That's the impetus for creating the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which fuels places like public radio and public television and the great programming we see on those various production platforms and organizations that are right in our communities, local NPR or national NPR or local PBS and national PBS. So it's a big question, but it's one where we've had, as a country, we have some history in doing this. And it feels like another moment in time, like a Great Society moment, to really think about how we reimagine how there will be public support for public media. So I just want to make that serve as a little quick answer to the audience member who asked that excellent question. There's some other questions, and I'm going to circle right to them right after I come back to you, Tracie, and ask you about this important idea of, sort of what is underway in understanding just how badly we have squandered the trust that journalism once had. There's a lot of blame going around pointed toward the platforms have undercut trust. Okay, that's true. That is true. They are capable of disseminating misinformation, disinformation with incredible speed. Misinformation has been around a long time, but the speed with which it's delivered and the intensity with which it bombards an issue is unusual and different. But we lost trust because we for lots of reasons. One of them is we just weren't listening to people well. And you talked about needing to listen to the communities. Tell me a little bit about this idea of how do we have to work to change who's telling the story and how they tell the story if we're really going to win that trust back?
So one of the things that the newspaper industry specifically has struggled with is recruiting and hiring news staffs that reflect the communities that they're located in. And so that's one of the things that Pivot looks for. We want to make sure that the staff the leadership is reflective of the community that news organization says it serves. And it looks like Pas La Voz producing news and information in the language that its community consumes it in. You know, English might be their second, third, fourth, fifth language, if at all. And so one of the things, you know, we were talking about earlier today was, you know, Pas La Voz was born out of this need to share with the immigrant community in Savannah, Georgia, how to keep themselves safe during a hurricane. Because when you look at the television screen, the meteorologists are speaking in English. Even that little crawl line at the bottom of the screen is in English. And so for folks who do not speak English, that was not helpful or useful. And so Pas La Voz started reporting hurricane coverage via Facebook Live. It was accessible because Facebook is free for Pas La Voz. It's also free for the folks that they're trying to reach. And they were reporting in Spanish, a language that was accessible to the people that they were trying to reach. Now that was easy for, you know, the dominant news outlet in Savannah to do, but they quite frankly never did it. They did wind up buying a Spanish language newspaper, but then it was a lot of crappy ads and very little to no content. And so that paper, Spanish language paper, wasn't reaching its audience either. But it was just, it's not rocket science, right?
Yeah.
Deliver the news in the language that's accessible to people. The other thing I think is, you know, from a funding standpoint, and I know philanthropy is a part of the news revenue mix. It's not the end all be all. It's not the only answer. We're going to have to get support from other places. And so, you know, I think trusting those publishers who are embedded in their communities, who are, you know, neighbors with the people they're trying to serve, it's important to trust them to know how to reach folks. April Ross, you know, the first thing she did with some of the money that we invested was hire a sports director, because she understood in a way that I didn't, that the way to bring people together was through sports. Everybody is cheering for some of the same teams in the region, and this is sports country. This is the South, so everybody's cheering for some of the same teams. And so she used sports news to bring folks in, and then she used the revenue that was generated. She generated probably $55,000, if not more, in revenue just from that sports coverage. She reinvested that back into the news product.
Right.
Hire people who look like the community that she is serving.
Exactly. Well said. I know that would be music to the ears of our executive director, Kim Kleeman of Report for America, who happened to go to UNC. So she knows that just how important sports are. She really wants our Report for America.
This is Bulldog country. We don't talk about those other folks.
Right. She wants Report for America Corps to really deepen its coverage of high school local sports, or, you know, really, really local sports, as a way to get the community to come together around the coverage. There's so many ways to do this. And you're right. We've got to have newsrooms that reflect the communities we cover. I just want to point out something that at Report for America, we're working hard on that. We have more than 50% of our core members identify as reporters of color. 2/3 are women. We have so much more work to do to stay on that, but it's a goal we have to all have. We're at less than 15 minutes, everybody. So what I want to do is get into a speed round of some questions. I'm going to ask you to try to really keep it to under a minute, like closer to 30 seconds, so we can get to some of the questions. And I want to reserve one last question for each of you too. So one question was directed specifically to you, Bobbie, about the New Bedford Light. Can you speak to the deterioration of the quality of the Standard Times, the once proud newspaper in the community that now feels more like a ghost paper? Basically, just talk a little bit about that part of your business model, just to fill the void, we'd have to say, left by the Standard Times. Does it, you know, what role did that play in improving the news ecosystem in your community?
Well, that's absolutely the crux of our origin story. the demise of the Standard Times, the absence of any kind of strong independent news coverage in a city that is in desperate need of it, because of its demographics and issues that it faces, really came from citizens neighbors who were talking to each other on the sidewalk outside their homes. What's going on? Well, I don't know what's going on. I don't know where to find out what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on. And, a couple of those folks who were having those conversations were former retired editors of the Standard Times. And, it kind of, that's how it got started, that with those kinds of conversations, and then more people got involved, and then there was a group that met every week, and then it became a little bit more formal, and there was a steering committee, and somehow somebody wrote me in because I moved to this area to retire, and like a moth to the flame, I just went right back in, because it's impossible to resist if you believe in the power of strong local journalism to make a difference in a community. You just can't look the other way. So
I know I relate to that, much to the dismay.
Yeah, I know you
my wife
can.
sometimes.
So, I just turned 70. I'm hoping to retire at some point. But what we've been able to do over the last 2 years, that we've only been publishing for a little bit over 2 years, is really broaden our staff to the diversity issue. Really, really important. Our internships and getting local kids from New Bedford High School and from the local community college and the local state university. We have the editors of those papers and others who are involved, who have recently gotten involved in our newsroom, learning how to do it, learning how to do the real thing.
Bobbie, I got to jump in because you're
Okay.
touching on a really, no, it's a great
I
point.
forgot I only had 1 minute.
Yeah, that's all right. It's a great point though, and it's going right into another question that I want to give both Tracie and Carol a chance to pick up on, which is, what other sort of training programs? Report for America, our core members who are out in these local communities, they have to do a service project. That's typically working with high school students on the high school newspaper or high school news organizations. But there's a lot of efforts to try to really bring young people into this. We're going to have a kind of new literacy around what is good journalism. We're going to have to get a new generation involved. Tracie, what are you seeing in your corner that is that is looking at this, like how to have apprenticeships or how to have a new way of bringing in a new generation of journalists?
Yeah. I think young people commit acts of journalism all the time. And when you asked that question earlier about how we define journalism, we need to look to how they are already redefining it.
Yeah.
That Instagram account that I talked about with the 900,000 something subscribers, those are all younger folks, right? And they know exactly how we're talking about trying to get them trained, and they need to be training us, right? About how do we reach this younger audience using the channels that they use. But at Morehouse College, they just launched their first journalism program at Morehouse, and just had one of their first graduates. But they teach a course called Social Justice Journalism. Younger people really, really care about the social issues plaguing our country right now. So let's teach them how to cover those issues in a really inclusive, impactful, and through a solutions journalism lens. And that's exactly what they're doing at Morehouse. But that's the standout program for me right now. We're also needing to try to train and teach young people how to sell advertising, how to understanding audience analytics, and some of that stuff is already happening as well.
Thank you. I do think it's incredible. I believe I have the name of the young girl, I think you'd have to say, not even young woman, who shot the video on her phone of George Floyd being murdered. Darnella Frazier, I think is her name, is a journalist. She was there. She bore witness to this, and all of us who saw that and were moved by it were in the hands of a young journalist who captured something very important in her community with incredible grace, by the way. If you go back and think about how that video was held and what impact it had, I wish it had the sort of reckoning that we'd hoped it might bring. I think it definitely exposed the problem. A lot of work to do on making sure we stay on track with the issues that need to be addressed. We're going to go to one last sort of business question, then I'm going to ask a final question that's going to have another speed round with you guys. But there's just a really good question in here about sort of what's happening on local levels, bootstrap teams, what's really nimble, what's really creative that's happening that you're seeing. I know I've already pointed out Bobbie's a great example of that. Tracie shared a few examples. But Carol, what are you seeing in your neck of the woods in Colorado that's really exciting? What are the real great programs that you're seeing that are coming to the fore and that are going to really suggest new models for revenue streams, both philanthropy and more traditional for-profit revenue streams?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that really comes to mind that we started this year is an ethnic media network. So we have really great ethnic publications in the Denver metro area and across the state that serve the Latinx population, the Black population, the AA NPI population, and Indigenous Americans. So, some of these are bootstrapped and others have been around for 50 years. But how to keep them viable and thriving. So we started this ethnic media, Colorado Ethnic Media Network, where we just 2 weeks ago had our first group ad buy. So there's power in numbers. We can take the demographics of all of those publications and take them to local, regional, and national advertisers. And
Carol, I'm going to jump in because we have 3 minutes left. That's going to give you each 1 minute to answer this last question. All right. The last question is really about optimism. It's about hope. It's like, what makes you hopeful right now in this moment that local journalism can play a role, if not fixing in our democracy, healing the divide in our democracy? So speed round, 1 minute each. Bobbie, I'm going to start with you. What makes you hopeful right now?
Well, as I said, I'm really blown away at the impact that the little New Bedford Light is having on the city in which we inhabit, and seeing that from little things to huge things is just renews my faith in, again, the power of journalism, of good journalism, having kind of ridden the high and then gone through the low and wondering like what it was all about, and just the way this community appreciates what we're doing.
Thank you.
Love letters we get. Love letters? Woo,
yeah.
That's the first.
Carol, 30 seconds. And Tracie, we're going to close with you.
Two things. Collaboration. It is working here in Colorado. It's working locally, statewide, and now it's working regionally. So that's my main thing. The other thing, to speak to the interns and pipeline, college is too late for interns. I helped start a program here in Colorado for 13 to 18-year-olds. We go into the schools, we look for BIPOC kids. If they're interested in playing video games, I'll find a spot for them in journalism. If they want to drive a truck, I'll find a spot for them in journalism. If they like to write poetry, I'll find a spot for them. So back the pipeline down. We don't have to go to college still for this profession. We can have apprentice and journeyman systems, and we will train you up, and then we can change what management looks like if we can
from
change
the bottom up. Thank you. And I would even add, it's not a profession, it's just a craft. And
yes,
that's
and
what I love about it.
If we change what management looks like, we change how things get covered in our communities.
Well said. Tracie, last question for you is that question. Give us some hope here. What are you seeing that makes you hopeful about how local journalism can be part of change?
I think these small, independent, hyperlocal news organizations are having an outsized impact, and they are generating revenue along the way. So they are instructive to the industry writ large about how this can be done, and about the value of relationships, building relationships with the folks that we want to impact with our civic news and information. And it's incredible to see these organizations grow and prosper in times when, as you mentioned earlier, we are in crisis, but these are oases in the desert.
Thank you, Tracie. Hey, I do a lot of these panels these days, You guys are so exceptional. All three of you. Thank you for being on this panel. I really just value our connections as colleagues. We got a lot of work to do. Thanks for taking some time to be with us. And thank you to the audience. What a great set of questions. I wish we had time to get to more of them, but thank you, everyone. Mary?
Okay, before you say thank you, we have to add a few things in, Charlie. I
Okay.
learned a lot. It was an amazing discussion. Thank you for the insight. Excellent. I'm sure you fired up some of the audience too, hopefully. So Cambridge Forum is made possible by generosity of Herb and Dorothy Vetter, the Lowell Institute, the Mass Cultural Council, Cambridge Community Fund, and you. So if you haven't coughed up anything for a while, feel free to go to the website, www.cambridgeforum.org, where you can sign up and you can join up for the newsletter. That doesn't cost you anything. Delighted to tell you we had a challenge met for $2,500. Somebody offered us that because they liked our mental coverage so much, and it was matched. So that's great. Thank you very much. We produce weekly NPR broadcasts of this program. And we also, the video of today's program will be edited by our partner, GBH Forum Network, and uploaded to YouTube shortly. And thank you, each and every one of you, for joining us. And I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.